You feel like every obstacle at work is designed to break you down, and each new challenge feels like it might be the one that finally defeats you. The harder you try to avoid problems, the more they seem to multiply, while you watch others somehow turn their difficulties into stepping stones for advancement. I am Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor who maintained inner peace, while ruling the most powerful empire in history and bearing the weight of millions of lives during plagues, wars, and constant political turmoil. What I discovered about obstacles will revolutionize how you view every challenge in your life, transforming them from barriers into the very path to your success. The same Stoic principles that guided me through the darkest imperial crises can guide you through any modern struggle, teaching you to see obstacles not as impediments, but as opportunities disguised as difficulties. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to transform their relationship with adversity. I never wanted to be emperor. That may surprise you, but it's the truth that shaped everything I came to understand about obstacles. When Antoninus Pius adopted me at the age of 17, I believed I was simply joining a noble family. I had dreams of becoming a lawyer, of pursuing philosophy in quiet contemplation, of living a life devoted to study and personal virtue. The imperial purple was never something I sought. It was thrust upon me like a burden I couldn't refuse. The moment I understood my destiny changed everything. I remember standing in the palace gardens, holding the imperial seal for the first time, feeling its weight not just in my hands, but pressing down on my entire future. This small piece of carved stone represented the lives of 60 million people who would depend on my decisions. Every choice I made would ripple across the known world. The philosophical life I had imagined, peaceful, contemplative, removed from worldly concerns, was suddenly impossible. That seal became my first real teacher about obstacles. Here was something I desperately didn't want, something that terrified me, something that seemed to block every path I had envisioned for myself. Yet, as I held it, I began to understand what would become the cornerstone of my philosophy. The obstacle is not what blocks your path, is your path. My reluctance to rule wasn't weakness, it was preparation. A man who craves power is corrupted by it before he even receives it. My resistance to imperial authority meant I would approach it with the caution and humility it demanded. The very quality that made me want to avoid the throne. My understanding of its terrible responsibility was exactly what would make me capable of bearing it. I spent 23 years learning to rule under Antoninus Pius, and every day presented new obstacles that I initially saw as interruptions to my real calling. Senate meetings that kept me from my books, legal disputes that pulled me away from philosophical contemplation, military briefings that seemed to have nothing to do with the life of virtue I wanted to pursue. Each responsibility felt like a barrier between me and my true purpose, but gradually I began to see these obstacles differently. Every difficult senator was teaching me patience. Every complex legal case was developing my judgment. Every military challenge was training my decision-making under pressure. The imperial responsibilities I had resented were not preventing me from becoming a philosopher. They were making me a better one. The weight of the purple taught me that obstacles are not random afflictions thrown at us by an uncaring universe. They are precisely calibrated challenges designed to develop the exact qualities we need for our true purpose. I needed to learn patience, wisdom, decisiveness, and emotional resilience, not for some abstract philosophical ideal, but because millions of people would depend on these qualities when I became emperor, when Antoninus Pius died and I finally assumed full imperial power. I no longer saw the burden as an obstacle to my philosophical life. I understood that being a philosopher emperor was not a contradiction, it was the synthesis my character required. The obstacle had become the way, not through my acceptance of it, but through my transformation by it. This is what I want you to understand about your own obstacles. They are not interruptions to your real life. They are your real life. Every challenge you face is developing qualities you will need for your ultimate purpose, even if you cannot see that purpose yet. The workplace pressures you resist, the difficult people you encounter, the setbacks that frustrate youth are not preventing you from becoming who you're meant to be. They are forging you into who you're meant to be. Asterisk, asterisk, nothing could have prepared me for the plague. When the first reports reached Rome in 165 AD, I thought it was simply another administrative challenge: deploy physicians, organize relief efforts, maintain order. I had no idea I was about to face the greatest obstacle of my reign, one that would kill millions of my subjects and fundamentally transform my understanding of what it means to lead through impossible circumstances. The Antonine Plague, as history would name it, swept through the empire like a merciless tide. Cities that had thrived for centuries were decimated. Trade routes collapsed. The military, already stretched thin along the borders, lost entire legions not to enemy swords, but to invisible death. Every morning brought reports of new casualties, new cities fallen silent, new regions crying out for help that seemed impossible to provide. I remember standing in my private study, surrounded by scrolls containing death tolls that grew larger. Each day, Alexandria, 30,000 dead. Athens, half the population gone. Even Rome itself was not spared. The smell of funeral pyres became as common as morning mist. My advisors spoke of divine punishment, of the gods' displeasure, of the need to find someone to blame. They wanted me to rage against this obstacle, to fight it with the fury of imperial power. But rage accomplishes nothing against a plague. You cannot command a disease to stop. You cannot negotiate with death. You cannot intimidate an invisible enemy. This was an obstacle that demanded a different response, entirely one that would teach me the most profound lesson of my life. I realized that the plague was not happening to the empire. It was happening through the empire. It was revealing what we truly were beneath the veneer of civilization and power. Some people hoarded grain while others starved. Some abandoned their duties while others worked tirelessly to help their neighbors. Some succumbed to despair while others found reserves of courage they never knew they possessed. The plague stripped away everything non-essential and showed us what remained. And what remained, I discovered, was our capacity to choose our response. We could not choose whether the plague came, but we could choose how we met it. We could not control who lived or died, but we could control how we treated those who suffered. We could not stop the tragedy, but we could determine what kind of people we became because of it. I made a decision that my advisors thought was madness. Instead of retreating to a secure location until the plague passed, I would remain in Rome, and led by example, I organized relief efforts personally, visited hospitals despite the risk, and used my own funds to purchase grain for distribution, not because I believed my presence would stop the plague, but because the obstacle of this crisis was demanding that I become the leader my people needed. The months that followed were among the darkest of my life, but also among the most clarifying. Every day I witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. I saw senators flee to their country estates, while common citizens risked their lives to care for strangers. I saw physicians who worked until they collapsed from exhaustion, and merchants who charged desperate people triple for basic supplies. But I also witnessed something extraordinary. The plague was not just destroying, it was revealing. It showed me that obstacles do not create character, they reveal it. Under extreme pressure, people become more of what they already were. The compassionate became heroes. The selfish became monsters. The philosophical became wise. I began to understand that this was true for me as well. The plague was not an interruption to my reign. It was the defining test of it. Everything I had studied about Stoic philosophy, every principle I had tried to understand intellectually, was now being forged in the fire of real crisis. The obstacle was forcing me to discover whether my philosophical beliefs could withstand the ultimate test. Through those terrible months, I learned that we cannot control external events, but we have absolute control over our responses to them. The plague taught me that obstacles are not obstacles to our path, they are the path itself, revealing who we truly are and who we have the potential to become. Asterisk, asterisk, while the empire was still reeling from the plague, the barbarian tribes beyond our borders sensed weakness. The Marcomanni Quadi and Sarmatians crossed the Danube in numbers we had never seen before, penetrating deeper into Roman territory than any foreign army in centuries. What should have been a time of recovery became a time of war. The obstacle of disease was immediately followed by the obstacle of invasion, and I found myself facing a choice that would define not just my reign, but my understanding of what it means to find peace in the midst of conflict. My generals wanted immediate, overwhelming retaliation. Crush them completely, they urged. Make such an example that no tribe will ever dare cross our borders again. Their logic was sound from a military perspective, but I had learned something from the plague years that made me approach this new obstacle differently. I had discovered that how we respond to challenges matters more than the challenges themselves. I decided to lead the campaign personally, not because I loved war, but because I understood that this external conflict was an opportunity to test everything I had learned about maintaining inner peace while managing outer chaos. Every morning in my tent along the Danube, I continued my philosophical practices. I wrote my thoughts, meditated on Stoic principles, and reminded myself that the barbarian invasions, like the plague before them, were not happening to me, they were happening through me, testing and refining my character. The irony was not lost on me. Here I was, a philosopher who valued peace above all things, leading armies into battle. But I began to understand that true peace is not the absence of conflict, it is maintaining your principles and inner tranquility. Regardless of external circumstances, the warrior who fights with hatred in his heart is defeated before the battle begins. The leader who makes decisions from anger creates more problems than he solves. During the Marcomannic Wars, I developed what I came to think of as the discipline of detached engagement. I could plan military strategies, make life-and-death decisions, and lead men into dangerous situations while maintaining philosophical equanimity. The external war was teaching me about the internal war that every person faces, the battle between our higher nature and our immediate impulses. I remember one particular evening after a difficult battle. We had achieved a tactical victory, but at great cost. Young men who would never see Rome again lay buried in foreign soil. The easy response would have been to celebrate our success or to rage against the necessity of violence. Instead, I used the moment to reflect on the nature of conflict itself. Every external enemy, I realized, is a mirror of some internal struggle. The barbarians who threatened our borders were not fundamentally different from the destructive impulses that threaten our inner peace. They represented chaos, violence, and the breakdown of civilized order. Learning to defend against them effectively while maintaining my philosophical principles was teaching me how to defend against the barbarian impulses within my own mind. The campaign lasted for years, taking me far from the comforts of Rome to the muddy banks of the Danube. But these years in the field, surrounded by the obstacles of war, weather, and constant danger, became some of the most philosophically productive of my life. It was during these campaigns that I wrote many of the meditations that would later guide my thinking. I learned that you can find tranquility anywhere if you understand that peace comes from within, not from external circumstances. The philosophical life is not about retreating from challenges. It is about meeting them with wisdom, courage, and inner strength. The barbarian invasions forced me to discover that I could maintain my principles under the most extreme conditions by the end of the wars. We had not only secured our borders, but established tribute relationships with many of the tribes. More importantly, I had proven to myself that obstacles, even those as severe as prolonged military conflict, do not have to disturb your inner peace. They can actually strengthen it by providing opportunities to practice virtue under pressure. The campaigns taught me that every external challenge is an invitation to develop internal strength. The barbarians who seemed like obstacles to the empire's peace became the means by which I developed unshakable inner peace. The most powerful weapon I developed during my years of facing obstacles was not a sword or a strategy, was the ability to see clearly. I call this the discipline of perception, and it is the foundation of everything I learned about transforming obstacles into opportunities. Most people are defeated by their challenges before they even begin to address them, not because the obstacles are insurmountable, but because they see them incorrectly. When you change how you see an obstacle, you change its power over you. This is not positive thinking or self-deception. It is rigorous mental training that allows you to see reality as it actually is, rather than through the distorting lens of emotion, assumption, or fear. The plague, the wars, the daily pressures of ruling an empire each taught me that our first response to any challenge determines everything that follows. I developed a daily practice that I want to share with you. Every morning, before the demands of imperial duties began, I would spend time examining my perceptions. I would take whatever obstacle was currently dominating my thoughts and deliberately look at it from multiple angles, asking questions that forced me to see beyond my initial emotional reaction. Is this obstacle as large as it appears, or have I magnified it through anxiety? Is this challenge truly unique to me, or have countless others faced similar difficulties and emerged stronger? Is this setback actually preventing my progress, or is it redirecting me toward a better path? Most importantly, what opportunity for growth, learning, or service is hidden within this apparent difficulty? Let me give you a specific example. Early in my reign, I faced a severe grain shortage that threatened famine across the empire. My initial perception was catastrophic. This obstacle could lead to widespread suffering, civil unrest, and the collapse of my authority. Fear and panic wanted to dominate my response, but I had trained myself to step back and examine the situation more clearly. I asked myself, what is actually happening here? Stripped of my emotional reaction, the harvest had failed in several key provinces due to unusual weather. This was a logistical problem, not a personal attack on my competence as emperor. What resources did we have available? What had previous emperors done in similar situations? What creative solutions might we discover if we approached this systematically rather than reactively? By changing my perception of the grain shortage, from catastrophic failure to complex logistical challenge, I was able to see possibilities that panic would have obscured. We organized emergency imports from other provinces, temporarily reduced grain exports, implemented rationing systems that actually improved distribution efficiency, and discovered alternative food sources that strengthened our long-term agricultural resilience. The obstacle of the grain shortage became the catalyst for developing better systems that served the empire for years afterward. But this transformation only became possible when I learned to see the challenge clearly, without the distortion of fear or the paralysis of overwhelm. This discipline of perception requires constant practice. Our minds naturally gravitate toward catastrophic thinking because our ancestors survived by preparing for the worst possible outcomes. But in our modern world, this tendency often creates more problems than it solves. Most of the obstacles we face are not life-threatening emergencies that require immediate panic responses. They are problems that require clear thinking and strategic action. I trained myself to pause before reacting to any obstacle and ask, what am I actually seeing here, and what am I adding to it? Usually, I discovered that the obstacle itself was much smaller than my mental elaboration of it. The actual problem was manageable. The story I was telling myself about the problem was what made it seem insurmountable. The discipline of perception also taught me to look for the hidden gifts within every challenge. Obstacles often force us to develop capabilities we never knew we needed. They introduce us to people who become crucial allies. They reveal weaknesses in our systems that, once addressed, make us much stronger. They strip away activities and force us to focus on what truly matters. Every obstacle contains information about how to overcome it. But this information is only visible when we learn to see clearly. The challenge that seems designed to destroy you is often carrying the exact tools you need for your next level of growth. The person who opposes you most vigorously may be pointing out blind spots that need your attention. The failure that seems to end your plans may be redirecting you towards something much better. But none of these hidden opportunities become visible until you develop the discipline of perception, the ability to see obstacles as they really are, rather than as filtered through fear, assumption, or emotional reaction. This is not a philosophical concept. It is a practical skill that can be developed through daily practice. Throughout my years of facing external threats, plagues, invasions, political conspiracies, discovered that the most important fortress was not the one protecting Rome's borders, but the one I built within my own mind. I call this the inner citadel, and it is the only place in the universe where you have absolute sovereignty. No external force, no matter how powerful, can penetrate this fortress without your permission. The concept came to me during a particularly dark period of the Marcomannic Wars. We were camped along the frozen Danube, surrounded by enemies, low on supplies, and facing the possibility of a devastating defeat. My generals were demoralized, my soldiers were exhausted, and the weight of potential failure pressed down on me like a physical burden. In that moment, I realized that while I could not control the barbarian armies, the weather, or the military situation, there was one realm where I remained completely free. My response to these circumstances, I began to understand that external obstacles can only affect you if you allow them access to your inner peace. They can damage your body, destroy your possessions, threaten your plans, and create enormous practical difficulties, but they cannot touch your core self unless you grant them permission. This realization was not philosophical theory, it was a practical discovery that transformed how I approached every challenge. The inner citadel is built through daily discipline. Every morning, I would remind myself that I am not my circumstances, my emotions, or even my thoughts. I am the awareness that observes all of these things. This awareness, this core self remains untouched by external events. When you truly grasp this distinction, obstacles lose their power to disturb your fundamental peace. Let me explain how this works practically. When the plague was raging through the empire, I could feel grief for the suffering of my people without allowing that grief to overwhelm my judgment. When barbarian armies threatened our borders, I could acknowledge the seriousness of the military situation without letting fear paralyze my decision. When senators plotted against my policies, I could recognize their opposition without taking it as a personal attack on my worth. The inner citadel does not make you emotionless or indifferent. It makes you free to respond appropriately rather than react emotionally. You can feel anger at injustice without being controlled by rage. You can experience sadness at loss without being consumed by despair. You can face uncertainty without being paralyzed by anxiety. Building this inner fortress requires understanding the difference between what is up to you and what is not up to you. External events, other people's actions, and even the consequences of your own decisions are ultimately not up to you. What is always up to you is your judgment about these events, your response to them, and the meaning you choose to assign to them. This distinction is not merely philosophical, it is intensely practical. When you stop trying to control what is not up to you and focus entirely on what is up to you, your effectiveness in dealing with obstacles increases dramatically. Instead of wasting energy on resentment, worry, or attempts to control the uncontrollable, you channel all your power into the areas where you actually have influence. I practiced this daily during the most challenging periods of my reign, when reports arrived of new military setbacks. I would acknowledge the facts without adding emotional elaboration. When political opponents attacked my policies, I would consider their arguments on merit without defending my ego. When personal tragedies struck my family, I would grieve appropriately without questioning the fundamental order of the universe. The inner citadel taught me that true invincibility comes not from avoiding obstacles, but from developing a core self that remains unshakable regardless of external circumstances. This is not numbness or denial. It is a profound strength that allows you to engage fully with life's challenges while maintaining your essential peace. You can build your own inner citadel starting today. Begin by observing the difference between events and your interpretation of events. Notice how much of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from the stories you tell yourself about what happens to you. Practice responding to obstacles from this place of inner strength rather than reacting from emotional overwhelm. The inner citadel is always available to you, but it must be consciously constructed through daily practice. It is the one place where no obstacle can reach you, and from this place of security, you can face any challenge with wisdom and courage. Death was my most constant companion and my greatest teacher, not in a morbid way, but as a daily reminder that transformed every obstacle from a permanent catastrophe into a temporary challenge. When you truly understand that your time here is limited, every difficulty becomes manageable because you know it, like everything else, will pass. I lost my father when I was young, and that early encounter with mortality began my education about the temporary nature of all things. Later, as emperor, I witnessed death on a massive scale through plague, war, and the natural course of life in an empire of 60 million people. But it was the death of my son Verus at age 7 that taught me the deepest lesson about obstacles and acceptance. When Verus died, I felt a grief so profound it seemed like it might destroy me. This was not just personal loss, it was the collapse of my hopes for the future, my plans for succession, my vision of family happiness. The obstacle of this grief felt insurmountable, like a wall of pain that would forever block my path to peace. I wanted to rage against the universe, to question the justice of the gods, to retreat from responsibilities that suddenly seemed meaningless. But in my darkest moments of mourning, I remembered something that changed everything. Verus's death, devastating as it was, would also pass. Not the love I felt for him, not the value of his brief life, but the acute agony of loss that seemed so permanent. Even this ultimate obstacle was temporary. This realization did not diminish my grief, but it prevented the grief from defining my entire existence. I began to practice what I call memento mori, remembering death, not to become depressed, but to gain perspective on every challenge I faced. When senators frustrated me with their political games, I would remember that both they and I would be dust within decades, making our conflicts seem less significant. When military campaigns dragged on longer than expected, I would recall that both victory and defeat were temporary conditions in the vast span of time. This practice transformed how I approached obstacles. Nothing, neither the most devastating setback nor the most glorious triumph, is permanent. The plague that killed millions eventually ended. The barbarian invasions that threatened the empire were eventually resolved. The political crises that seemed to threaten the foundation of Rome were eventually overcome. Understanding the temporary nature of all conditions made even the most severe obstacles manageable. But contemplating death taught me something even more important. Urgency without panic. Knowing that my time was limited made me take action on important matters without delay. But understanding that death comes to everyone made me less anxious about any particular outcome. I could work with complete dedication while maintaining philosophical detachment from results. This perspective also revealed the futility of many obstacles that people create for themselves. When you regularly contemplate mortality, you stop wasting energy on trivial conflicts, meaningless status competitions, and elaborate plans for distant futures that may never arrive. Death strips away everything non-essential and shows you what actually matters. I developed a daily practice of considering my own mortality not with fear, but with gratitude for the present moment. Each morning, I would remind myself that this day might be my last, which made me more present, more grateful, and more focused on using my time well. This practice made obstacles seem smaller because they were temporary interruptions to a life that was itself temporary. Death also taught me about legacy. Knowing that I would not live forever made me focus on what would outlast my physical presence. The obstacles I overcame, the principles I developed, the example I set, these could influence people long after my death. This understanding transformed personal struggles into opportunities to create something valuable for future generations. The ultimate obstacle, death itself, became the key to transcending all other obstacles. When you accept that everything, including your own life, is temporary, you stop clinging so desperately to conditions that must change anyway. You can engage fully with challenges while maintaining the perspective that comes from understanding their place in the larger order of existence. Asterisk, asterisk, the Stoics speak of 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. But I discovered, through years of facing obstacles, that these are not abstract ideals to be studied in peaceful libraries. They are practical tools that can only be forged in the fire of real adversity. Comfort never created character. Ease never developed virtue. The obstacles you want to avoid are precisely the experiences that will transform you into the person you need to become. Wisdom is not accumulated information, is judgment refined through difficult decisions made under pressure. When the plague struck the empire, I could have relied on others to make the hard choices about resource allocation, quarantine measures, and emergency policies. But true wisdom only develops when you must weigh incomplete information, consider multiple perspectives, and make decisions that will affect millions of lives. The obstacle of the plague forced me to develop wisdom I never could have gained from philosophical texts alone. Every crisis presented new opportunities to practice wise judgment. Should we close the borders and risk economic collapse, or keep them open and risk spreading the disease? Should we divert military resources to help plague victims, or maintain our defenses against barbarian threats? These were not theoretical questions, they were immediate challenges that demanded wisdom, born from experience, not just knowledge gained from books. Courage, I learned, is not the absence of fear, it is right action in spite of fear. The barbarian invasions terrified me, not because I was cowardly, but because I understood the consequences of failure. Millions of people depended on my military decisions. The wrong choice could mean the destruction of civilization itself. But courage means feeling that fear and acting anyway, based on principle rather than emotion. I remember standing with my troops before a crucial battle, feeling my heart race with anxiety about the outcome. But I also felt the strange strength that comes from accepting fear without being controlled by it. The obstacle of my own terror became an opportunity to model courage for my soldiers. They needed to see that bravery is not fearlessness, is doing what is right even when you are afraid. Justice became real for me, not through philosophical study, but through the daily obstacles of governing fairly in an imperfect world. How do you balance the needs of different provinces when resources are limited? How do you punish wrongdoing without destroying the possibility of redemption? How do you maintain law and order while showing mercy to those who deserve it? These obstacles forced me to develop practical justice that went far beyond theoretical understanding. The plague, years especially, tested my commitment to justice. Some citizens hoarded grain while others starved. Some physicians demanded excessive payment for treating the sick while others worked without compensation. Some wealthy families fled to safety while poor families had no choice but to remain. In infected areas, the obstacle of this inequality forced me to develop policies that embodied justice in concrete terms. Not just noble intentions. Temperance, self-discipline, and moderation could only be developed through facing the constant temptations that came with absolute power. I could have used the imperial treasury for personal luxury while people suffered. I could have avoided the discomforts of military campaigns by sending others to fight. I could have indulged my preferences and emotions rather than maintaining the discipline required for effective leadership. But the obstacles of responsibility forced me to develop real temperance. When I wanted to retreat to philosophical studies while crises demanded my attention, I learned discipline. When I felt angry at incompetent subordinates but needed to maintain authority, I learned emotional control. When I craved the simple life of a private citizen but duty required imperial service, I learned to subordinate personal desires to larger purposes. The beautiful paradox I discovered is that obstacles do not prevent virtue, they create it. You cannot develop courage without facing genuine threats. You cannot develop wisdom without confronting difficult decisions. You cannot develop justice without dealing with unfair situations. You cannot develop temperance without resisting real temptations. This is why I learned to welcome obstacles rather than merely endure them. They were not interruptions to my moral development. They were the very means by which character is forged. Every challenge became an opportunity to practice virtue, and every practice session made me stronger for the next test. ****. Leadership reveals its true nature not during times of prosperity and peace, but in moments of crisis when everything seems to be falling apart. The obstacles that test leaders most severely are not the obvious external challenges, they are the internal pressures of maintaining composure, making clear decisions, and inspiring confidence when you yourself are facing uncertainty and fear. During the darkest days of the plague, when death tolls mounted daily and panic threatened to overwhelm rational response, my greatest challenge was not managing the logistics of the crisis, it was managing myself. My advisors looked to me for strength and certainty, but I felt the same fear and uncertainty they did. The obstacle was not just the disease itself, but the gap between the confidence others needed to see and the doubt I actually felt. I learned that authentic leadership during crisis requires what I call transparent strength, acknowledging uncertainty without projecting panic, showing vulnerability without appearing weak, and demonstrating that you can handle difficult emotions without being controlled by them. People do not need their leaders to be superhuman. They need them to be genuinely human while maintaining the capacity for clear thinking and decisive action. One of my most difficult moments came when several prominent senators urged me to flee Rome during the plague's peak. Their logic was sound. If the emperor died, the empire would face political chaos in addition to the health crisis. But I realized that my physical presence in the city during its darkest hour was more important than my physical safety. The obstacle of personal risk became an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that inspires others to rise to their highest potential. This decision taught me that leading through crisis often requires you to do exactly what your instincts tell you to avoid. When everyone else is retreating, effective leaders step forward, When others are panicking, leaders remain calm. When circumstances are uncertain, leaders make the best decisions they can with incomplete information and then adjust as new information becomes available. The key insight is that obstacles test not just your individual character, but your ability to maintain your principles while bearing responsibility for others. It is one thing to practice Stoic philosophy in private meditation. It is another to embody those principles when thousands of people are depending on your decisions. The obstacle of leadership responsibility forces you to develop a deeper, more practical wisdom than pure philosophical study could ever provide. I discovered that crisis leadership requires a particular kind of emotional discipline. You must feel the full weight of responsibility without being crushed by it. You must acknowledge the severity of challenges without becoming overwhelmed by them. You must maintain hope without denying reality. This balance can only be developed through actually facing crisis situations where real consequences follow from your decisions. The barbarian invasions taught me another crucial lesson about leadership during obstacles. You cannot inspire others to face challenges you are not willing to face yourself. When I decided to personally lead the military campaigns rather than directing them from Rome, I was not trying to prove my courage. I was demonstrating that shared sacrifice creates shared commitment. Leaders who ask others to endure obstacles they themselves avoid quickly lose credibility and effectiveness. But perhaps the most important discovery was that obstacles often reveal leadership potential in unexpected places. During both the plague and the wars, I witnessed ordinary citizens display extraordinary leadership when circumstances demanded it. Physicians who had never held official positions organized relief efforts more effectively than experienced administrators. Common soldiers developed tactical innovations that my trained generals had missed. The obstacles created opportunities for leadership to emerge from sources I never would have anticipated. This taught me that one of the most important roles of leadership during crisis is not just solving problems yourself, but creating conditions where others can discover and develop their own leadership capabilities. Obstacles are not just tests for established leaders, they are opportunities for new leaders to emerge and for everyone to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The ultimate lesson of leading through crisis is that obstacles are leadership laboratories. They provide the exact conditions necessary for developing and demonstrating the qualities that distinguish true leaders from mere authority figures. The challenges that seem designed to overwhelm leaders are actually designed to create them. The most difficult lesson I learned about obstacles was also the most liberating. The power of complete acceptance of what cannot be changed. This is not passive resignation or helpless surrender. Is the active choice to stop fighting reality and instead work skillfully within whatever circumstances exist. True freedom comes not from controlling external conditions, but from accepting them fully while maintaining complete sovereignty over your response. I struggled with this concept for years because it seemed to contradict everything I had been taught about leadership and imperial power. Emperors are supposed to control events, shape circumstances, and bend reality to their will. The idea of accepting obstacles seemed like abdication of responsibility, but I gradually discovered that acceptance is not the opposite of action. It is the foundation for effective action. During the Marcomannic Wars, I spent months trying to force military solutions that the terrain, weather, and enemy tactics made impossible. I wasted enormous resources attempting to impose my preferred strategies on situations that demanded different approaches. My resistance to accepting battlefield realities made everything more difficult than it needed to be. The breakthrough came when I stopped fighting the conditions and started working with them. Instead of cursing the muddy ground that slowed our cavalry, I learned to use it strategically against enemy forces who were equally affected. Instead of resenting the harsh winter that made campaigning miserable, I turned it into an advantage by developing supply systems that our enemies lacked. Instead of fighting the guerrilla tactics that frustrated our traditional battle formations, I adapted our methods to match the reality of this particular conflict. This shift from resistance to acceptance did not make me passive, it made me far more effective. When you stop wasting energy fighting unchangeable conditions, you have much more energy available for influencing what can actually be changed. Acceptance creates clarity about where your power can be most productively applied. The philosophy of acceptance taught me to distinguish between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable, the natural result of illness, loss, disappointment, and the countless difficulties that are part of human existence. But suffering is optional. It is the mental elaboration we add to pain through resistance, resentment, and the futile wish that reality were different than it is. When my son died, I experienced profound pain that was appropriate and natural, but I learned not to compound that pain with suffering created by fighting the reality of his death. I could grieve fully while accepting that death is part of life, that parents sometimes outlive their children, and that this tragedy, like all conditions, was temporary. Acceptance did not diminish my love for him, or the natural sadness of loss. It prevented those feelings from becoming destructive forces that would interfere with my other responsibilities. This distinction between pain and suffering applies to every obstacle. The challenge itself may be genuinely difficult, but most of our distress comes from our resistance to the challenge rather than the challenge itself. When you fully accept that obstacles are part of life, not interruptions to life, but integral elements of it, too can engage with them much more skillfully. Acceptance also revealed something crucial about the nature of control. We have much less control over external events than we imagine, but much more control over our internal responses than we typically exercise. Most people exhaust themselves trying to control what is beyond their influence, while neglecting the areas where they have complete authority. Acceptance redirects this energy toward where it can actually make a difference. Practiced this daily by examining my reactions to frustrating situations. When senators opposed policies I considered essential, instead of fighting their resistance, I would accept it as information about how to present my ideas more effectively. When weather delayed military operations, instead of resenting the delay, I would use the time for planning and preparation. When illness forced me to modify my schedule, instead of fighting the limitations, I would find different ways to accomplish my goals. The philosophy of acceptance is ultimately about flow learning, to move like water around obstacles rather than trying to smash through them like a battering ram. Water always finds a way through, around, or over barriers, not through force but through persistence and adaptability. This is not weakness. It is the supreme strength that comes from working with reality rather than against it. The most unexpected source of wisdom in my life came from those who opposed me most vigorously. My critics, political enemies, and even military adversaries became some of my greatest teachers, though I resisted this lesson for many years. The obstacle of opposition, which seemed designed to frustrate and defeat me, actually became the means by which I developed deeper understanding, stronger character, and more effective leadership. Early in my reign, I took criticism personally. When senators questioned my policies, I saw it as an attack on my competence. When military commanders disagreed with my strategies, I interpreted it as insubordination. When philosophers challenged my understanding of Stoic principles, I felt it as a threat to my intellectual authority. This resistance to opposition made every disagreement into a painful obstacle that drained my energy and clouded my judgment. The transformation began during a particularly contentious Senate debate about grain distribution during the plague. Senator Cassius Dio, who had opposed many of my policies, delivered a scathing critique of my emergency measures. My first impulse was defensive anger. How dare he question my decisions during a crisis when I was working tirelessly for the good of the empire. But something made me pause and listen more carefully to his actual arguments, rather than just my emotional reaction to them. Buried within his opposition were several valid points I had not considered. My distribution system, while well-intended, was indeed creating some of the inefficiencies he described. His alternative suggestions, though presented in a hostile manner, contained practical insights that could improve our response to the crisis. By setting aside my ego and examining his criticism objectively, I discovered valuable information that made our relief efforts more effective. This experience taught me to see opposition as information rather than attack. Every person who disagrees with you is offering you data about how your ideas, methods, or communication might be improved. They may be wrong in their conclusions, but they are usually seeing something real that prompted their disagreement. The obstacle of their opposition becomes an opportunity for learning. If you can separate the message from the messenger, I began to cultivate what I called grateful opposition, actively seeking out people who would challenge my thinking and point out flaws in my reasoning. I invited critics to private meetings where they could express their concerns without public confrontation. I asked my advisors to present counterarguments to my proposals before implementing them. I even corresponded with barbarian leaders to understand their perspectives on our conflicts. This practice revealed something profound. Most people who oppose you are not evil or malicious. They are responding to real concerns or different priorities that you may not have fully considered. The barbarian tribes who invaded our borders were not motivated by pure hatred of Rome, but by genuine needs for land, resources, and security for their people. Understanding their motivations did not mean accepting their methods, but it allowed me to develop more effective responses that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. The obstacle of difficult people taught me about my own character weaknesses. The senators who frustrated me most were often reflecting back qualities I needed to examine in myself. Those who criticized my impatience were showing me where I needed to develop greater tolerance. Those who questioned my decisions were revealing areas where I needed to communicate more clearly or think more thoroughly. I learned to ask myself, what is this person's opposition teaching me about myself or my approach? Sometimes the answer was that I needed to be more patient, more thorough in my explanations, or more willing to consider alternative perspectives. Sometimes it revealed blind spots in my thinking or assumptions I had not questioned. Occasionally, it showed me that I was correct in my position but needed to defend it more skillfully. Even my military enemies became teachers. The barbarian tactics that initially frustrated our traditional Roman strategies forced us to become more adaptable and creative. Their guerrilla methods taught us about mobility and flexibility. Their knowledge of local terrain showed us the importance of understanding environmental factors. By studying how they fought, we became better fighters ourselves. The ultimate lesson was that opposition, properly understood, is not an obstacle to your success, is an essential element of your development. Those who challenge you are doing you a service by forcing you to clarify your thinking, strengthen your arguments, and develop your character. The people who agree with you all the time cannot help you grow in the same way that those who disagree with you can. Philosophy without practice is merely intellectual entertainment. The true test of any wisdom is whether it functions in the harsh reality of daily life, especially when facing genuine obstacles. During my years as emperor, I developed a practical system for applying Stoic principles to real challenges, transforming abstract philosophy into concrete tools for obstacle management. My day began before dawn with what I called morning preparation, not just reviewing my schedule, but mentally preparing for the obstacles I would likely encounter. I would remind myself that today would bring frustrations, difficult people, unexpected setbacks, and problems that had no perfect solutions. By anticipating obstacles, rather than being surprised by them. I could respond from wisdom rather than react from emotion. I would specifically visualize challenging scenarios: a senator attacking my policies, a military defeat reaching my desk, news of rebellion in a distant province, or personal illness affecting my duties. For each potential obstacle, I would mentally rehearse my philosophical response. This was not pessimistic thinking. It was strategic preparation that allowed me to maintain stoic principles under pressure. The morning routine also included reviewing the fundamental distinction between what is up to me and what is not up to me. I would mentally sort the day's challenges into these categories: the weather during military campaigns, other people's opinions of my decisions, the outcome of battles. Despite good planning, these were not up to me. My effort, my principles, my responses to whatever happened, these were completely up to me. This daily practice prevented me from wasting energy on things beyond my control, while focusing my attention on areas where I could actually make a difference. When reports arrived of setbacks in distant provinces, I would immediately ask, what parts of this situation are up to me? The answer might be sending additional resources, replacing ineffective governors, or adjusting policies based on new information. The parts that were not up to me, the past events themselves, other people's past decisions, or circumstances I could not have prevented, would acknowledge without emotional elaboration. Throughout the day, I practiced what I called real-time philosophy, applying Stoic principles to obstacles as they arose. When a meeting became contentious, I would silently remind myself that other people's anger was their choice, not my responsibility. When unexpected crises demanded immediate attention, I would pause briefly to center myself before responding. When frustrating delays interrupted my plans, I would use the time for reflection rather than resentment. The key was developing automatic responses rooted in philosophical principles rather than emotional impulses. This required constant practice. When facing criticism, my trained response became curiosity rather than defensiveness. What can I learn from this feedback? When encountering setbacks, my automatic thought became, what opportunity might be hidden within this challenge? When dealing with difficult people, I would immediately remind myself, this person is struggling with their own obstacles and responding from their current level of wisdom. Evening reflection was equally important. Each night, I would review the day's obstacles and examine how well I had applied philosophical principles to each challenge. Where had I maintained stoic equanimity? Where had I been swept away by emotion? What lessons could I extract from the day's difficulties? This honest self-examination allowed me to strengthen my philosophical practice through experience. I also kept written records of these reflections, the meditations that would later become my most famous philosophical work. Writing forced me to clarify my thinking and served as a reference for future challenges. When facing similar obstacles later, I could review how I had successfully handled them before and what principles had proven most useful. The practical application of Stoicism also required adapting philosophical principles to specific roles and responsibilities. As emperor, I had obligations that pure philosophers did not face. I had to make decisions that affected millions of people, engage in political negotiations, and use force when necessary to maintain order. The challenge was maintaining Stoic principles while fulfilling these duties effectively. This integration taught me that philosophy is not escape from practical life, is preparation for engaging more skillfully with practical life. The obstacles that seemed to interrupt my philosophical development were actually the means by which abstract principles became embodied wisdom. Every difficult day was a laboratory for testing whether Stoic philosophy could function under real pressure. From my earliest years as emperor, I battled chronic illness that brought constant physical discomfort and periodic intense pain. This was not the kind of obstacle I could negotiate with, strategize around, or delegate to others. It was a daily reminder that some challenges must be faced entirely from within. Using nothing but mental strength and philosophical principle, the illness manifested as stomach ailments, chest pains, and periods of weakness that modern physicians might recognize as symptoms of peptic ulcers or other digestive disorders. During military campaigns, I would often conduct strategy meetings while fighting waves of nausea. During long Senate sessions, I would maintain imperial dignity while experiencing sharp abdominal pains. During ceremonial duties, I would project strength and authority while feeling physically depleted initially. I approached physical pain as I approached other obstacles by trying to control or eliminate it. I consulted the best physicians in the empire, tried every treatment available, and hoped that intellectual understanding of my condition would somehow reduce its impact. But physical pain taught me a different lesson about obstacles. Some challenges cannot be overcome through force of will or clever strategy. They can only be transcended through a fundamental shift in how you relate to them. The breakthrough came during a particularly severe episode. While I was reviewing reports from the Germanic front, the pain was so intense that I could not concentrate on the military dispatches that required immediate attention. My first reaction was frustration. This physical obstacle was preventing me from fulfilling my duties. But then I realized I was fighting two battles, one against the pain itself, and another against my resistance to the pain. The second battle was optional and was making the first one much worse. I began to experiment with acceptance of physical discomfort rather than resistance to it. Instead of tensing against pain, I would consciously relax around it. Instead of resenting my body's limitations, I would work within them. Instead of seeing illness as an enemy, I would treat it as a stern teacher that was developing my mental resilience in ways that comfort never could. This shift required distinguishing between pain and suffering. Pain is a physical sensation and pleasant but temporary. Suffering is the mental elaboration we add to pain through resistance, self-pity, and the wish that reality were different. I discovered that while I could not eliminate the physical sensations, I had complete control over my mental response to them. During the worst episodes, I would practice what I called philosophical observation of my own experience. I would notice the physical sensations without immediately labeling them as terrible or unbearable. I would observe my mental reactions without being swept away by them. I would maintain awareness of the part of myself that remained untouched. By physical distress, the observer consciousness that could witness pain without being defined by it. This practice transformed my relationship not just with illness, but with all forms of discomfort and limitation. Physical pain became a laboratory for developing mental strength. Each episode was an opportunity to practice the principles I advocated to others. If I could maintain philosophical equanimity while experiencing intense bodily discomfort, I could maintain it under any external pressure. The chronic illness also taught me about the temporary nature of all conditions. Even the worst pain episodes eventually passed. Even periods of relative health were temporary. This understanding helped me appreciate good days without clinging to them, and endure difficult days without being overwhelmed by them. Perhaps most importantly, physical pain kept me humble and connected to the suffering of my subjects. An emperor who had never experienced genuine hardship might lose touch with the reality of human struggle. My illness ensured that I remained aware of vulnerability, limitation, and the courage required to function despite obstacles that cannot be eliminated. I learned to see my chronic condition not as a barrier to effective leadership, but as preparation for it. The mental discipline required to maintain clarity and decision-making capacity while in physical distress was excellent training for maintaining these same qualities under any form of pressure. Physical obstacles taught me that true strength is not the absence of challenge, but the ability to function effectively despite challenge. The greatest obstacle I faced was not plague, war, or political opposition. It was power itself. When you can command armies, control vast wealth, and have your every whim instantly gratified, the challenge becomes maintaining your character rather than being corrupted by unlimited authority. Power is the most seductive obstacle because it disguises itself as freedom while actually creating the most dangerous form of bondage. When I became emperor, every material comfort was immediately available to me. The finest foods, the most luxurious accommodations, the most talented entertainers, the most beautiful objects in the known world, all were mine simply by expressing a desire. Every person I encountered had strong incentives to agree with me, flatter me, and tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. This environment, which might seem like paradise, was actually a carefully constructed prison that could destroy judgment, wisdom, and virtue. The obstacle of power manifested in subtle ways that were initially difficult to recognize. When everyone around you constantly affirms your opinions, you begin to lose the ability to think critically about your own ideas. When every desire is immediately satisfied, you lose appreciation for simple pleasures and develop an endless hunger for more elaborate gratifications. When you rarely face genuine opposition or criticism, you become mentally soft and emotionally fragile. I watched this corruption destroy other powerful men throughout history. Emperors who began with good intentions gradually became tyrannical, as power insulated them from the consequences of their actions. Wealthy men who started with generous spirits became increasingly selfish as abundance made them lose touch with ordinary human struggles. Leaders who initially served others began serving only themselves as authority provided them with more and more opportunities for self-indulgence. The antidote to this obstacle required deliberate practices that artificially recreated the challenges that power tends to eliminate. I maintained a simple personal lifestyle despite having access to unlimited luxury. I regularly sought out people who would disagree with me and tell me uncomfortable truths. I took on physical hardships during military campaigns that I could have avoided. I studied philosophy not just for intellectual pleasure, but as practical training for resisting the corrupting effects of authority. I also practiced what I called voluntary discomfort, deliberately choosing inconvenience, simplicity, or hardship when easier options were available. I would sleep on simple military cots during campaigns rather than in elaborate imperial tents. I would eat basic rations with my soldiers rather than having elaborate meals prepared for me alone. I would walk when I could ride, and work when I could delegate. These practices were not asceticism for its own sake, but practical exercises for maintaining perspective and character. They reminded me that comfort and luxury were not necessities, that my happiness did not depend on external conditions, and that I could function effectively under any circumstances. They also kept me connected to the experience of ordinary people who did not have the option of avoiding discomfort. The obstacle of power also taught me about the responsibility that comes with authority. Every advantage you possess creates an obligation to use it wisely. The resources available to me as emperor were not personal property to be enjoyed, but tools to be used for the benefit of those I served. Power that is not directed toward worthy purposes becomes a corrupting force that destroys both the leader and those under his authority. I learned to see imperial authority not as a privilege to be enjoyed, but as a burden to be carried responsibly. This perspective transformed power from a potential obstacle to character into a tool for character development. Every decision required me to consider not just what I preferred, but what was best for the empire. Every use of authority demanded that I exercise wisdom, justice, and restraint. The ultimate lesson about power as an obstacle is that it tests your deepest values under the most seductive conditions. Anyone can maintain virtue when virtue is easy or when external pressures enforce good behavior. The real test comes when you have the freedom to indulge your worst impulses without immediate consequences. Power strips away external constraints and reveals what you are made of at the deepest level. This obstacle taught me that true freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want, but the strength to do what is right, even when wrong choices are available and attractive. The emperor who is enslaved by his appetites is less free than the philosopher who chooses virtue despite having few material possessions. As my reign progressed and I contemplated the legacy I would leave behind, I realized that my greatest contributions to future generations would not come from my successes, but from how I had transformed obstacles into wisdom that others could use. The struggles that had seemed like personal burdens were actually universal lessons waiting to be extracted and shared. Every obstacle I had faced was preparing me to leave behind something more valuable than military victories or political achievements. I began writing my personal meditations not as a philosophical treatise for public consumption, but as a record of how Stoic principles actually function when tested by real adversity. Each entry was born from a specific challenger, difficult decision, a painful loss, a moment of doubt or frustration. These were not abstract philosophical concepts, but practical tools forged in the fire of imperial responsibility and personal struggle. The plague years taught me that leadership during crisis creates knowledge that can only be gained through experience. The decisions I made, the mistakes I learned from, the principles that proved effective under extreme pressure, these insights could help future leaders face their own impossible situations. My struggle with the weight of responsibility during the empire's darkest hours was not just personal growth, but preparation for teaching others how to bear similar burdens. The barbarian wars showed me that external conflicts often mirror internal struggles that every person faces. The strategies for dealing with hostile forces along the borders were also strategies for dealing with hostile impulses within the mind. The patience required for long military campaigns was the same patience needed for any difficult personal transformation. The courage necessary for leading troops into battle was the same courage required for facing any intimidating life challenge. My battles with chronic illness revealed insights about the relationship between physical limitation and mental strength that could benefit anyone facing health challenges, aging, or the simple reality of human vulnerability. The techniques I developed for maintaining effectiveness, despite pain and fatigue, were applicable to countless situations where people must function despite less than ideal conditions. Even my struggles with the corrupting potential of power offered lessons for anyone who achieves success, authority, or influence in any field. The practices I developed for maintaining humility and perspective, despite privilege, could help others avoid the character deterioration that often accompanies achievement. I realized that obstacles are not just personal challenges to be overcome, are opportunities to develop wisdom that can serve others who will face similar difficulties. Every struggle you successfully navigate creates knowledge that can help others navigate their own struggles. Your adversity becomes their advantage when you extract and share the lessons learned through your experience. This understanding transformed how I approached new obstacles. Instead of seeing them purely as problems to be solved or endured, I began viewing them as research projects that could benefit future generations. What was this challenge teaching me about human nature, effective strategy, or character development? How could the insights I was gaining be preserved and transmitted to others who would face similar situations? I also began to see that the most valuable legacy is not the elimination of obstacles for future generations, but the development of wisdom and strength that enables them to face their own obstacles more effectively. You cannot protect others from all challenges, nor should you try. What you can do is model how to transform challenges into opportunities for growth, and leave behind the principles that made your transformation possible. The written meditations became my attempt to preserve these hard-won insights for my successors, both as emperor and as human beings facing the universal obstacles of mortality, responsibility, and the challenge of living virtuously in an imperfect world. Each observation was distilled from actual experience, tested under real pressure, and proven effective in practical application. Looking toward the end of my reign, I found profound meaning in the idea that my struggles had significance beyond my personal development. The obstacles that had seemed like burdens were actually opportunities to create something lasting and valuable. The adversity that had tested my character was also developing wisdom that could strengthen others long after my death. This perspective gave new purpose to current challenges. Instead of simply enduring difficulties, I was researching them, extracting their lessons, and preparing to pass on their gifts. Every obstacle became a contribution to the wisdom heritage I could leave behind, transforming personal struggle into public service that would outlast my physical presence in the world. Though I ruled nearly 2,000 years ago, I recognize the obstacles you face in your modern world. The arena has changed, but the fundamental challenges of human existence remain remarkably consistent. Your workplace politics mirror the Senate intrigue I navigated daily. Your pressure to perform under scrutiny echoes the weight of imperial responsibility I carried. Your struggle to maintain integrity while advancing your career parallels my challenge of ruling justly while wielding absolute power. The emails that flood your inbox demanding immediate response are no different from the urgent dispatches that reached me from every corner of the empire, each claiming to be the most critical issue requiring my attention. The meetings where you must defend your decisions to people who do not understand the full context are identical to the Senate sessions where I explained complex policies to senators who had never governed a province or led a military campaign. Your difficult colleagues who seem determined to undermine your efforts are the same personalities I encountered in ambitious generals who questioned my strategies and court advisors who pursued their own agendas while pretending to serve the empire. The uncertainty you feel about whether your hard work will be recognized or rewarded mirrors my own doubts about whether my policies would create lasting benefit or be undone by future rulers. The technology may have evolved beyond anything I could have imagined, but the fundamental obstacles remain unchanged because human nature itself has not changed. People still struggle with fear, ambition, jealousy, and the desire for recognition. They still face pressure, deadlines, competing priorities, and the challenge of balancing personal needs with professional responsibilities. They still must decide whether to compromise their principles for short-term advantage or maintain their integrity despite potential costs. Your modern workplace is simply a new version of the ancient arena where character is tested and developed. The obstacles that frustrate you today in reasonable deadlines, unclear expectations, insufficient resources, difficult personalities, constant change are the same challenges that have confronted every generation in different forms. The specific circumstances change, but the underlying dynamics of obstacle and response remain constant. This consistency means that the principles I developed for transforming obstacles into opportunities are as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome. When you face criticism from superiors, you can apply the same approach I used with hostile senators. Listen for valid information while not taking attacks personally. When projects fail despite your best efforts, you can use the same mental framework I employed after military setbacks. Extract lessons while avoiding destructive self-blame. When office politics threaten to derail your progress, you can remember how I handled court intrigue. Focus on what you can control while accepting that other people's actions are beyond your influence. when you feel overwhelmed by competing demands. You can use the same prioritization method I developed for managing imperial responsibilities. Distinguish between what is truly urgent and what merely seems urgent. The tools I developed for maintaining inner peace despite external chaos work just as effectively for modern stress as they did for ancient crises. The discipline of perception that helped me see obstacles clearly applies to contemporary challenges. The inner citadel that protected my peace of mind during wars and plagues can protect yours during organizational restructuring and economic uncertainty. Your modern obstacles even offer some advantages that my ancient ones did not. You have access to information and communication technologies that allow for faster problem solving and broader perspective. You live in societies with greater social mobility, where obstacles to advancement based on birth circumstances are less rigid than they were in my time. You have medical knowledge and treatments that make physical obstacles less limiting than they were for previous generations. But perhaps most importantly, you have the accumulated wisdom of centuries of human experience with obstacle transformation. The principles that I and others developed through painful trial and error are now available to you as tested strategies rather than experimental approaches. You do not have to reinvent these methods. You can adapt and apply them to your specific circumstances. The modern arena demands the same virtues that the ancient arena required: wisdom to see clearly, courage to act despite fear, justice to treat others fairly, and temperance to maintain perspective despite pressure. The contexts change, but the character requirements remain constant. Your contemporary obstacles are opportunities to develop these timeless qualities, just as surely as my imperial challenges were opportunities for my own development. Now you must develop your own philosophy for transforming obstacles into opportunities. While my Stoic principles can guide you, your specific circumstances, personality, and challenges require you to adapt these concepts into a personal system that works for your life. This is not about copying my approach exactly, but about using my experience as a foundation for building your own obstacle-conquering methodology. Start by examining your current relationship with obstacles. Do you see them as interruptions to your real life, or as integral parts of your development? Do you approach challenges with curiosity about what they might teach you, or with resentment about what they are preventing you from doing? Do you use difficulties as opportunities to practice virtue, or as excuses to abandon your principles? Honest self-assessment is the beginning of philosophical development. Create your own daily practices for obstacle preparation and response. This might be a morning routine where you anticipate potential challenges and mentally rehearse your philosophical response to them. It could be an evening reflection where you review how well you applied your principles to the day's difficulties. Perhaps it includes regular reading or study that reinforces your commitment to growth through adversity. Develop personal mantras or reminders that you can use in the moment when obstacles arise. Mine included phrases like the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. Yours might be different words that capture the same spirit. This challenge is developing my character, or every obstacle contains a hidden opportunity, or I can handle whatever comes with wisdom and strength. Identify the specific virtues you want to develop through obstacle transformation. While the classic Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance are universal, you may want to focus on particular qualities that your circumstances demand. Perhaps you need to develop greater patience, clearer communication skills, stronger emotional resilience, or better decision-making under pressure. Use obstacles as targeted practice opportunities for these specific qualities. Build a system that reinforces your philosophical approach to challenges. Surround yourself with people who understand that obstacles are opportunities for growth, rather than simply problems to be avoided. Find mentors, friends, or colleagues who can. Remind you of your principles when difficulties make it hard to remember them yourself. Share your philosophical commitments with others who can hold you accountable to your highest standards. Document your own obstacle transformations, as I documented mine in my meditations. Keep a record of how you successfully applied philosophical principles to specific challenges. Write down the insights you gain from difficult experiences. Note which approaches work best for which types of obstacles. This personal philosophy journal becomes both a tool for clarifying your thinking and a resource for future challenges. Experiment with different approaches until you find what works best for your personality and circumstances. Some people respond better to analytical approaches that break obstacles down into manageable components. Others prefer intuitive methods that focus on emotional and spiritual responses to challenges. Some benefit from collaborative approaches that involve others in obstacle resolution, while others work best with individual reflection and action. Practice your philosophy during small challenges to prepare for larger ones. Use minor frustrations, delays, technology problems, scheduling conflicts as training opportunities for maintaining philosophical equanimity. If you can apply your principles to trivial obstacles, you will be better prepared to use them when facing major crises. Remember that developing a personal philosophy for obstacle transformation is itself a lifelong practice. You will make mistakes, forget your principles under pressure, and need to recommit to your approach repeatedly. This is normal and expected. Even the first, after decades of philosophical practice, had moments when emotion overwhelmed wisdom, or when I responded to challenges less skillfully than I had hoped. The goal is not perfection, but progress. Each obstacle becomes an opportunity to refine your approach and strengthen your philosophical muscles. Each challenge teaches you something about yourself, your principles, or your methods that makes you more effective in handling future difficulties. Your personal philosophy should be practical, tested under real conditions, and continuously adapted based on your experience. It should reflect your values, serve your goals, and help you become the person you want to be through the challenges you cannot avoid. Most importantly, it should transform obstacles from sources of suffering into sources of strength, wisdom, and growth. As I reach the end of sharing these insights with you, I want you to understand that what I have taught you is not just ancient philosophy or historical curiosity, is a timeless truth about the nature of human existence and growth. The principle that obstacles become the way is as eternal and reliable as any law of nature. It has worked for countless people across centuries and cultures, and it will work for you if you commit to practicing it. The impediment to action truly does advance action. What stands in the way genuinely becomes the way. These are not merely inspirational sayings, but precise descriptions of how character develops, how skills improve, and how wisdom emerges from experience. Every obstacle you face contains within it the exact qualities you need to develop for your next level of growth. Every challenge you encounter is perfectly designed to teach you something you need to learn. This is not coincidence or wishful thinking. It is the fundamental structure of how human beings develop strength, resilience, and capability. Just as physical muscles grow stronger only when they encounter resistance that challenges them beyond their current capacity, your mental, emotional, and spiritual muscles develop only when life presents you with obstacles that demand more than you currently possess. The obstacles that seem designed to stop you are actually designed to grow you. The challenges that appear to block your path are actually revealing your path. The difficulties that feel like punishments are actually preparations for opportunities you cannot yet see. This pattern has held true throughout human history and will continue to hold true for as long as human beings face challenges and grow through overcoming them. I have shared with you the specific methods I developed for transforming obstacles into opportunities because I want you to have practical tools, not just theoretical concepts. But the methods are less important than the fundamental shift in perspective they represent. When you truly understand that obstacles are not interruptions to your journey but integral parts of it, everything changes. You stop resenting challenges and start welcoming them as growth opportunities. You stop avoiding difficulties and start engaging with them as character development exercises. You stop seeing setbacks as evidence of failure and start recognizing them as information about how to succeed more effectively. You stop fighting reality and start working skillfully within whatever circumstances exist. This transformation in how you relate to obstacles will affect every area of your life. Your career will advance more rapidly because you will see setbacks as learning opportunities rather than reasons to give up. Your relationships will improve because you will view conflicts as chances to practice patience and understanding, rather than personal attacks to be defended against. Your health will benefit because you will approach physical challenges as opportunities to develop mental strength rather than sources of anxiety and frustration. Most importantly, you will develop unshakable inner peace because your happiness will no longer depend on having perfect external conditions. You will know that you can handle whatever life presents to you, not because you can control what happens, but because you can control how you respond to what happens. The legacy I want to leave you with is not just my specific techniques for obstacle transformation, but the profound confidence that comes from knowing you have access to a reliable method for turning any challenge into an advantage. No matter what obstacles you face, professional setbacks, relationship difficulties, health challenges, financial pressures, or any other form of adversity, you now have a proven system for extracting value, meaning, and strength from these experiences. Remember that this philosophy requires practice, patience, and persistence. You will not immediately transform every obstacle into an obvious opportunity. You will sometimes forget these principles under pressure and respond from emotion rather than wisdom. You will occasionally feel overwhelmed by challenges that seem too large or numerous to handle. This is normal and does not mean the philosophy is failing. It means you are human and still learning. The eternal way is not a destination you reach once and then maintain effortlessly. It is a path you walk daily, sometimes stumbling, but always returning to the fundamental truth that obstacles are the way. Each challenge you face skillfully makes you stronger for the next one. Each difficulty you transform into growth prepares you for greater obstacles and greater opportunities. This is my gift to you. The knowledge that no obstacle can defeat you if you understand how to learn from it. The way forward is always available, even when it is disguised as the way blocked.